Okay, so get this, listeners. Turnover Village. It's in Mexico.
Yeah.
And everyone there walks on their heads.
That's right.
And we're not talking about some metaphor or, a circus act or anything like that.
Ooh.
This is how they live their lives.
Everyday life.
You guys requested this one, and it's wild. Even with all the research that we've done, it's hard to imagine, right?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those places that makes you really rethink what's possible, what humans are capable of. What's so fascinating to me is that it's not just like a quirky thing they do.
Right.
It's like this whole adaptation to their way of life, like their bodies, their minds, their whole society. It all revolves around this inverted way of living.
So let's start with the how. Like, how is this even possible? I mean, I can't imagine just having a really strong neck is enough.
No, definitely not. It goes way beyond that. I mean, even their bones are different. Yeah, like their skeletal structure is key. There have been studies comparing the people in Turnover Village to other people, and they've found that their vertebrae are different, especially in their necks, like the cervical spine.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're literally built for this. It's in their bones.
Literally in their bones. Okay, that's amazing. But what about, like, blood flow? Because if I stand on my head for too long, I get lightheaded. It's not good.
Right. Well, that's where those adaptations come in. Their circulatory system has also adapted, so they don't have the same problem with blood pooling in their heads.
It's incredible how the human body can change and adapt.
It really is.
So, okay, we know that they're physically built for it, but then there's this whole other thing, this inversion philosophy that's like woven into their culture. Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. So they believe that by physically inverting themselves, they're also inverting their thinking. They're constantly challenging the way that we normally see things. It's about looking at the world from different angles, and I mean that literally and figuratively.
So it's not just about walking on their heads.
No.
It's about how they approach everything in life.
Exactly. And it shows up everywhere in their lives, from their social interactions to how they solve problems. It's like their whole worldview is shaped by this idea of inversion. It even affects their language.
What do you mean?
Well, they don't have a word for I.
Wait, what? No word for I?
Mm-hmm.
How do they talk about themselves?
Their language emphasizes the group, the collective.
Mm-hmm.
So they use pronouns that focus on we instead of me. It's a really different way of thinking about identity than we're used to, where it's all about the individual.
That's amazing. So it's like their whole society is built on this idea of interconnectedness.
Yeah. And you can see that in how they deal with conflict, too.
Oh, yeah, I read something about that. Tell me more about how they resolve disagreements.
So when two people have an argument, they both hang upside down.
They hang upside down.
Yeah, from this special structure. It kind of forces them to see things from the other person's perspective.
Wow, that's definitely a different approach.
Yeah. And it seems to work. Research shows that they have a really low level of conflict in Turnover Village, and they cooperate really well with each other, probably because of this practice, and because they're always thinking about we instead of me.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So by inverting themselves physically, they've kind of inverted their whole social structure as well.
It seems that way.
Less
Yeah.
conflict, more cooperation. Okay. But now I'm curious about the day-to-day. Like, what does it actually look like to live in Turnover Village? How do their houses work? Do they eat upside down?
That's where it gets really interesting. From what we've gathered from the few people who have been allowed into the village, it seems like their entire way of life is adapted to head walking.
So everything's upside down.
Pretty much. I mean, imagine eating a meal while you're suspended upside down. Their houses are built for it. Everything is designed from that inverted perspective. They've basically flipped our concept of gravity on its head.
Wow. So it's not just about walking on their heads, it's their entire existence that's built around this inversion. I'm trying to imagine what that would even be like.
It's pretty mind-blowing, right?
It is. I mean, just the physical demands alone. Wouldn't they have, like, constant neck problems or back problems?
You'd think so, but actually, they report very few issues like that.
Really?
Yeah, their bodies are so used to it. And they've been doing it their whole lives. It's amazing how resilient they are.
So it's like they've figured out a way to make this seemingly impossible way of life work for them. But what about mentally? What's it like to live in a world where everything is literally upside down?
Well, it's hard to say for sure because we don't have a lot of access to do research there.
Right.
But there are some reports that they have very low levels of stress and anxiety.
Huh.
Some researchers think that being upside down might actually help regulate their nervous systems.
So maybe, in a way, they've found a way to escape the stress and anxiety that we all struggle with.
It's a possibility.
It's an intriguing thought. But this begs the question, why? Why would a whole community choose to live this way?
Yeah, that's the big mystery, isn't it? There are a few theories. One idea is that it started as a way to survive. Maybe their environment was difficult to navigate, and moving around on their heads was more efficient.
So their way of moving shaped their whole culture. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Another theory is that it was a ritual. Maybe they did it to connect with something spiritual, and over time it just became a part of everyday life.
Interesting. So what started as a spiritual practice became a way of life.
That's the idea. And there's another theory that's really interesting.
What's that?
Some people believe that they did it to be different from everyone else, to protect their culture and create their own unique identity.
So it was a deliberate choice to stand out.
Exactly. In a world that often tells us to conform, they decided to embrace their own unique way of being. And that choice has shaped everything about their lives, their bodies, their minds, their social structures, even their language.
It's a powerful example of the amazing things humans are capable of. But it also makes me wonder about how we should approach cultures that are so different from ours.
That's a really important question. Turnover Village makes us rethink our ideas about what's normal and what's possible. It shows us how many different ways there are to live and be human. And it really gets you thinking, like, what is normal, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, they're turning our whole idea of what humans can do on its head.
That's exactly what's so captivating about Turnover Village.
Yeah.
It's not just the head walking, it's how that one thing impacts their whole way of life.
Right.
Makes you think about all the different ways there are to experience the world.
It definitely does. And this whole idea of perspective, seeing things differently, it really seems to be at the heart of everything they do, Even the little things.
Yeah.
Like we talked about eating upside down, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Think about it. Their homes, the tools they use, even the games they play. It's all designed around being upside down.
Like they live in a completely different reality where
Right.
up is down and down is up.
Exactly. It's pretty wild to imagine, isn't it?
It is. I mean, wouldn't that make even the simplest things really difficult, like just moving around?
You'd think so, right? But they seem to manage just fine.
I guess they've been doing it their whole lives.
Exactly. They've been training for it since they were babies, basically. Their bodies and their brains are wired for it.
That's incredible. Okay, so physically, they're adapted. But what about mentally? I mean, you mentioned earlier that they have really good spatial reasoning skills.
Yeah, and problem solving, too.
Is that because of the head walking?
Well, think about it. They live in a world where their perception of space is constantly being challenged. They're always having to reorient themselves, think in 3 dimensions. That kind of mental workout probably has a big impact on how their brains develop.
So it's like the brains have adapted to this upside-down world.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. But are there any, specific examples of how their problem solving is different?
Oh, yeah. There was this one account from a researcher who was there when they were building a bridge.
A bridge.
Yeah, across a ravine. And instead of building it from the bottom up like we would, they started from the top, hanging upside down, working their way down. It was amazing to see. They just had this completely different understanding of how to work with space.
Wow. So it really is like they have a different set of rules in their heads. And this whole inversion philosophy, it seems like it affects more than just how they think about space. It affects their social interactions too, right?
Absolutely.
Like the fact that they don't have a word for I in their language. How does that impact their society? I mean, especially things like leadership and decision making.
Well, it suggests that they have a much more collective approach, right? The emphasis is always on we, not me. So it's likely that consensus and cooperation are much more important than individual ambition.
So instead of having one leader calling all the shots, they probably have a more distributed form of leadership where everyone has a say.
Exactly. And that same focus on the collective probably extends to their economic system, too. I mean, we don't have a lot of information about that, but it's possible that they share resources based on need rather than individual accumulation.
So it's like a society that prioritizes the well-being of the whole community over individual gain. That's a pretty radical concept, especially compared to our capitalist systems. Does it actually work? I mean, do they have a more harmonious and equitable society?
It's a great question, and unfortunately, it's hard to say for sure without more research. But the evidence we do have, like the low conflict and high cooperation, suggests that their system does seem to be working for them.
It makes you wonder if there are things we could learn from them.
Definitely.
about different ways to structure our own societies, different values, different priorities.
Mm.
Maybe there are ways to foster a stronger sense of community and interconnectedness.
Turnover Village really throws a wrench into our usual way of thinking, doesn't it? It's a glimpse into a completely different way of being human.
It really is.
Yeah.
But how have they managed to keep their way of life secret for so long, especially in today's world where everything is so connected?
Well, their secrecy is really a testament to how dedicated they are to protecting their culture. They've been very careful about who they allow into their village. Only a select few outsiders have been granted access, people who have proven that they respect Turnover Village's way of life and that they'll conduct ethical research.
So they're not completely isolated, but they're very selective about who they let in. But what about technology, like social media and the internet? How have they dealt with that?
It seems like they've embraced some technologies, but on their own terms. They use things like communication devices to stay connected to the outside world, but they're very careful about controlling the flow of information.
So they're using technology in a way that benefits their community, but also protects their culture. That's pretty impressive. But as the world gets more and more connected, can they keep that balance?
That's the challenge, right? Globalization and all these technological advances, they present both opportunities and threats. On the one hand, they could use these tools to share their knowledge with the world, to teach us about different ways of living sustainably.
But on the other hand, more exposure could lead to exploitation, misrepresentation, even the loss of their unique identity.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act for sure. But I think their history of adaptation and resilience shows that they're probably up to the challenge.
And as we continue to learn more about Turnover Village, we'll hopefully gain a better understanding of how to protect and preserve cultures in a world that's constantly changing.
Mm.
But beyond all the sociological and anthropological stuff, there's a bigger message here, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
About the power of perspective.
Turnover Village is a powerful reminder that there are so many different ways of seeing the world, of being human. Their existence challenges our assumptions, encourages us to embrace diversity, and reminds us that human potential is far greater than we often imagine.
Yeah, it's like it makes you realize that what seems normal to us is just one tiny slice of all the ways there are to live and experience the world.
Exactly. It's all about perspective, right?
Yeah.
And Turnover Village, with their whole upside-down way of life, really highlights that. It forces us to look outside our own little bubble and realize that there are so many other ways of being human, but it also raises some really important ethical questions.
You're right. Like, how do we balance our curiosity about Turnover Village with their right to privacy?
That's a big one, especially since they've chosen to stay hidden from the world for so long.
Exactly.
Ugh.
I mean, we want to learn and understand, but we also need to respect their autonomy.
Absolutely. When we're dealing with a community like this, it's crucial to approach research with a lot of humility and sensitivity.
Hmm.
Our goal should be to learn from them, not to exploit or sensationalize their culture.
Right. We need to make sure that any research we do actually benefits Turnover Village in some way.
Exactly. We have a responsibility to make sure our work doesn't harm them or misrepresent their way of life.
It's definitely a delicate balance. But practically speaking, how do we even study a community that's so secretive?
Well, it takes time and patience. It starts with building trust, showing them that we respect their culture and their right to self-determination.
This is not just about parachuting in and doing a quick study. It's about building relationships.
It is, and it's also about constantly checking our own biases, making sure we're not coming in with preconceived notions about what we expect to find.
We need to be open to the possibility that they might completely challenge our understanding of what it means to be human.
Exactly. Because they do, don't they? Their whole way of life, their philosophy, their social structure, it all makes us rethink what we thought we knew about human potential and how societies can function. They're like a living, breathing example of how things can be done differently.
And maybe by understanding them, by learning from their experiences, we can start to see our own society, our own challenges, in a new light.
I think so. You know, the more we learn about Turnover Village, the more we realize that it's not just about a group of people who walk on their heads.
It's about so much more than that.
It is. It's a story about human adaptability, about the power of perspective, and about the beauty of diversity.
And it challenges us to question everything we thought we knew about what's normal, about what's possible.
It reminds us that there are so many different ways to experience the world, to live a meaningful life.
It's a reminder to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep an open mind, and to always be amazed by the world around us. Well, that's about it for our deep dive into Turnover Village.
It's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it?
It really has. Thanks to everyone for listening. We hope this has inspired you to see the world in a new way. Until next time, keep those perspectives flexible.